Iran just fielded a weapon that rewrites interception math. On March 15, 2026, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched Wave 54 of Operation True Promise 4. For the first time in this conflict, they deployed the Sejjil, a two-stage solid-fuel ballistic missile capable of reaching Tel Aviv in approximately 7 minutes, a missile that alters its flight path mid-descent, a missile that Israel's most advanced interceptors were not engineered to reliably stop. And what happens in the next 72 hours will determine whether every barrel of oil on the planet gets permanently more expensive. 4 things are happening simultaneously right now that the evening news has not yet connected into a single coherent picture. The Sejjil carries a maneuvering reentry vehicle, a warhead that physically changes trajectory during its terminal descent. Arrow interceptors are designed to solve a predictable ballistic arc. The Sejjil does not fly a predictable arc. The question no defense analyst has publicly answered is this: how many successful arrow interceptions against a MaRV-equipped target has Israel confirmed under verified combat conditions in this conflict? We will answer that. According to a report by Semaphore, Israel informed the United States that it was running critically low on ballistic missile interceptors. The Israeli military publicly denied this. Both statements cannot be true. The financial weight of that contradiction, measured in what each arrow round costs and how many have been fired, is the number nobody is putting on screen. We will. The Strait of Hormuz now processes fewer than 5 ship transits per day. The historical average is 138. The International Energy Agency has called this the largest disruption to global energy supplies in recorded history. Brent Crude hit $106 per barrel on March 16th. Yet India is no longer asking Washington for permission to negotiate its tanker passage. It is dealing directly with Tehran. That one sentence carries the weight of a structural shift in dollar-denominated energy trade. We will explain exactly what it means. The United States has confirmed spending $12 billion on this conflict in 16 days. Kevin Hassett, director of the White House National Economic Council, confirmed that figure on CBS's Face the Nation on March 15th. The question that figure does not answer, and that nobody in Washington is framing correctly, is what $12 billion has actually purchased strategically. By the end of this video, you will understand this conflict at a level that most analysts currently covering it do not yet have. If you want to understand what happens before it becomes front-page news, this channel is where you need to be. Stay with me, because the Sejjil is not just a weapon, it is a financial instrument. And the Strait of Hormuz is the mechanism through which it is being deployed against every economy on Earth, including yours. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes on Iran. Within hours, Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed. The IRGC responded within the same news cycle, launching what it designated Operation True Promise 4, a retaliatory campaign that, according to ACLED data, produced more than 90 attempted strikes against Israel in its first 5 days alone. By March 2nd, Hezbollah had entered the exchange, firing more than 1,000 shorter-range rockets and drones at Israel from Lebanese territory, according to Israeli military spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Nadav Shoshani, cited by the New York Times on March 16th. Iran's strategic calculation shifted from volley-based saturation to precision attrition, firing fewer missiles, but selecting targets with escalating symbolic and military weight. March 15th marked that escalation's clearest signal. Wave 54 introduced the Sejjil. Iranian state media confirmed this. The IRGC stated the strikes targeted centers of administration and decision-making affecting Israeli air operations, along with defense infrastructure. According to First Post, citing local Israeli media, one Sejjil reportedly struck near the Tel Aviv residence of a U.S. consular official, an act of deliberate symbolic targeting. At least 3 Israelis sustained reported injuries during that barrage in southern Tel Aviv. That is the verified timeline. Now consider the financial architecture behind it. This is not the first time a Gulf energy disruption has been triggered by a military escalation under these specific conditions. In 1990, Iraq's cross-border military operation into Kuwait sent Brent Crude from $17 to $46 per barrel in 90 days. The financial mechanism driving that shock was identical to what we are watching now. The threat, not the confirmed reality, of Hormuz closure was sufficient to move global oil markets by more than 150%. In June 2025, Iran and Israel fought a 12-day conflict. Iran fired over 500 ballistic missiles. Oil spiked. A ceasefire followed. Markets recovered. The structural assumption embedded in that outcome was that Iran would always accept a ceasefire before crossing the Hormuz threshold. That assumption is now operationally invalid. The current conflict has produced what the IEA calls the largest energy supply disruption in history. The financial structure driving the 1990 shock was a threatened closure. The financial structure driving this one is an actual closure, with no ceasefire on the table on either side. But the question nobody's asking yet is this: If Iran can keep oil above $100 for 30 consecutive days, what happens to central bank reserve policy in economies that hold dollars as their primary energy hedge? That historical parallel only tells us half of what is happening. The other half is financial, and it is the half the headlines are ignoring. The Sejjil is 18 meters long, weighs 23,600 kilograms, and carries a 700-kilogram warhead. Its solid fuel propulsion means no fueling window, no observable pre-launch signature that satellites can catch in time for a preemptive strike. Its road mobile transporter erector launcher platform allows Iranian units to fire, relocate, and fire again before targeting solutions can be confirmed. The New York Times reported on March 16th that Israeli military officials claimed approximately 70% of Iran's missile launchers had been rendered inoperable. The Institute for the Study of War, citing a senior Israeli military official, placed that figure at up to 290 launchers, disabled out of an estimated 410 to 440 total. Iran's response to that degradation was to decentralize and go mobile. Wave 54 was that doctrine in operational form. Step back from the battlefield for a moment. Brent Crude reached $106 per barrel on March 16, 2026, before settling at $104.63 as of 0430 GMT, according to Al Jazeera's Energy Desk. That represents a 40% increase since February 28th. The United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Center confirmed that fewer than 5 vessels are transiting the Strait of Hormuz daily, compared to a historical average of 138. 20 commercial vessels have been attacked in the region since the conflict began. Qatar has suspended gas production at its Ras Laffan industrial complex. Bahrain's state oil company has declared force majeure on its shipments. Iraq's southern oil fields, among the most productive in the region, have seen production fall by 70%, according to Al Jazeera. The IEA used one precise phrase to describe the cumulative effect: the largest disruption to global energy supplies in history. The number that no outlet is reporting correctly right now is this: India is negotiating directly with Tehran to secure safe passage for its tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. Al Jazeera confirmed this on March 16th. India is not asking Washington. It is bypassing the United States entirely. Every oil transaction that India settles with Iran outside the dollar framework is a structural vote against the petrodollar architecture. This is not a diplomatic footnote. It is a precedent. China, Japan, France, and the United Kingdom all declined Trump's call to deploy their navies to the Strait. Japan and Australia formally stated they have no plans to send ships, per Al Jazeera, reporting on March 16th. Trump issued a public demand, by name, to China, Japan, France, and the United Kingdom to join a naval coalition to reopen the Strait. None committed. Trump then told the Financial Times on March 15th that NATO faces a very bad future if it refuses to respond. NATO's silence in response to that statement is not diplomatic hesitation. It is a structural position. Saudi Arabia has not publicly condemned Iran's retaliatory strikes on Gulf infrastructure, despite its own territory being targeted. That asymmetry is not diplomatic caution. It is a government calculating which side of a post-war regional order it wants to be on. But the consequences you just heard are only the surface. What financial markets are quietly pricing in right now is a scenario that none of the officials at those podiums are willing to name publicly. The official American position, as stated by the White House on March 15th, is that Operation Epic Fury has functionally destroyed Iran's ballistic missile capacity, rendered its navy combat ineffective, and achieved complete and total aerial dominance over Iranian territory. The official Iranian position, as stated by Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, is that the conflict was initiated by U.S. and Israeli choice and that Iran will defend itself no matter how long it takes. On the surface, this appears to be a war of competing claims, one side declaring victory, the other declaring irreversibility. While U.S. officials describe a degraded and diminishing Iranian threat, the energy futures market is pricing in sustained closure of the Strait of Hormuz with no near-term resolution. Brent Crude has not fallen below $100 since the conflict began. Al Jazeera's energy reporting as of March 16th confirms a market see no end in sight. That gap between the official narrative of imminent Iranian defeat and the financial reality of $104 oil is where the analytical truth lives. Now run the interceptor cost calculation. Iran has fired more than 300 ballistic missiles toward Israel since February 28th, according to Institute for National Security Studies data cited by the New York Times. Each Arrow 2 or Arrow 3 interceptor costs between $2 million and $4 million per unit, according to Missile Defense Advocacy Analysis and JNS reporting. If Israel fired even one interceptor per incoming ballistic missile, a conservative estimate, that represents between $600 million and $1.2 billion in defensive expenditure in 16 days. The Semaphore report, citing unnamed American officials, alleged Israel had informed the U.S. it was critically low on interceptors. The IDF denied this. But Lieutenant Colonel Shoshani confirmed to the New York Times that whenever Israel is in broad operations going on for weeks, there's a process of re-equipping in real time. That is not a denial of shortage. That is a description of active resupply dependency. China issued a condemnation of the strikes. But China's ambassador to the UN Security Council used the word deeply concerned and not shocked and not condemning. China has not moved its naval assets toward the Gulf. China has also not committed to the Hormuz coalition. China's oil import dependency on Gulf supply is approximately 40% of its total crude requirements. A $106 oil price damages Beijing as much as anyone. Yet China is not acting. A government that is genuinely alarmed about its energy supply acts. A government that is waiting to observe which architecture, dollar-denominated or alternative, survives this disruption simply watches. China is watching. What happens to central bank reserve policy if oil holds above $100 for 30 consecutive days? India's direct negotiation with Tehran is the first visible answer. It is not a rogue transaction. It is the test case for a framework that multiple non-Western economies have already discussed in bilateral settings. The dollar's position as the universal energy settlement currency rests entirely on the assumption that no major buyer can bypass it. That assumption is now being tested in real time under the conditions of the largest energy supply disruption in recorded history. Step back from the battlefield for a moment, because the most important development in this conflict is not happening in the air. It is happening in the currency markets and shipping lanes, and that is what we turn to now. De-escalation requires two simultaneous conditions: Iran agreeing to suspend Hormuz disruption activity, and the U.S. agreeing to a defined endpoint for military operations. Trump stated publicly on March 15th that Iran had expressed willingness to negotiate, but that terms were not good enough yet. A senior Iranian security official told Al-Mayadeen the same day that there is currently no scenario for a ceasefire. For de-escalation to materialize, a third-party intermediary, most likely Qatar or Oman, would need to bridge that gap within the next 2 to 4 weeks before Iran's remaining mobile launcher capacity degrades further. Financial impact if this occurs: oil analysts project Brent would drop toward the $80 to $85 range based on the precedent of the June 2025 ceasefire, which saw a $22 per barrel correction within 72 hours of the truce announcement. A prolonged exchange with no resolution locks and structural Hormuz disruption. Iran's strategy, as analyzed by Hamidreza Azizi of the German Institute for International and Security Affairs and cited by Al Jazeera, is attrition, exhausting alert systems with low-volume harassment fire while preserving core mobile launcher assets. Kevin Hassett confirmed the U.S. has spent $12 billion in 16 days. At that rate, a 90-day stalemate approaches $70 billion in direct U.S. expenditure alone, excluding the compounding economic cost of sustained 100-plus oil. Financial impact: the IEA has already described the current disruption as historically unprecedented. Sustained stalemate extends that precedent indefinitely, with inflation implications for every oil-importing economy. The specific threshold that would signal major escalation is the confirmed deployment of U.S. naval assets inside the Strait of Hormuz to escort commercial shipping, an action Trump has threatened, but that Pentagon officials have conditioned on further Iranian degradation. If U.S. warships enter the Strait, Iran has publicly reserved the right to treat that as an act of direct hostility. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi stated explicitly that Iran will defend itself no matter how long it takes. In this scenario, oil analysts have projected Brent above $130 per barrel. The Strait of Hormuz closure removes approximately 20% of global oil supply from the market simultaneously, a figure the IEA confirmed in current reporting. Regardless of which path this conflict takes, one outcome has already become irreversible. The strategic assumption that Iran would accept a ceasefire before triggering a Hormuz closure has permanently collapsed. Every defense doctrine and energy security model built on that assumption is now operationally outdated. India's direct negotiation with Tehran is not an anomaly. It is the opening transaction of a post-Hormuz energy settlement architecture that does not require Washington's permission. When this video opened, we said Iran had fielded a weapon that rewrites interception math. What the evidence now shows is something broader. The Sejjil's debut in Wave 54 was not the event. The Sejjil was the announcement. The event is a 16-day-old conflict that has produced the largest energy supply disruption in recorded history, is costing the United States $12 billion and counting, and has opened a visible crack in the dollar's position as the universal settlement currency for global energy. 3 things you now know that you did not know before watching this. 1. The Sejjil's maneuvering reentry vehicle capability makes it structurally difficult for aero interceptors to engage reliably at scale, not because the Arrow is a failed system, but because interception of a maneuvering terminal phase warhead requires a probability of kill that degrades under volume and unpredictability simultaneously. 2. Israel's publicly denied but actively managed interceptor resupply dependency means that Iran's attrition strategy, volume over precision, carries genuine arithmetic logic. Every Arrow round costs between $2 million and $4 million. Iran's mobile launchers cost a fraction of that to operate. 3. India's direct negotiation with Tehran for tanker passage is the first confirmed bypass of the dollar-denominated energy settlement system under active conflict conditions. That precedent does not disappear when the conflict ends. The answer to where this goes next will not come from any press conference or official statement. It will come from the Brent Crude forward curve, the UK MTO transit count through the Strait, and the next country that chooses to negotiate its energy supply directly with Tehran rather than through Washington. When that country is named, we will be here to break it down before it becomes front-page news. If what you understood in the last 15 minutes is not what you heard on the evening news, then you already know why this channel exists. Share this with someone who is still reading the headline version.